Everyone. My name is Lily. I use she, her pronouns, and today my presentation is on the intersection of gender and poverty in the United States. So my main focus today, obviously the issue of gender and poverty is extremely broad. So by hopefully giving the United States as a case study, we can also start to have a conversation about how do we resolve gender inequalities as well as issues of poverty across not only the United States, but across the world. But today we're going to be using the United States as our main source of information and case study. So my introduction, so in the United States, even though the United States oftentimes consider the US as this very, I guess, wealthy and, this first world country. However, when you kind of look closer, take a microscope to the United States, you can find that the inequalities that exist in the US is quite vast. And obviously, um, not just in the US, but in different places across the world, gender disparities are actually very, very blatant. And different issues affect oftentimes women and other gender marginalized folks a lot more than they do, for example, cis het men, right? So in 2018, a study found that more women than men live in poverty in the United States. 56 of those in poverty were women, so more than half of those who live in poverty are women. And at that point, it was the number was 21.4 million people, and that's quite a staggering number considering how how much money and how much tax revenue the United States generates. But clearly, it's not a lot of that is going towards assisting people and uplifting them from poverty. And of course, COVID-19 has done nothing but exacerbate the economic insecurity that a lot of people, especially women, face. Because, as we know, like in the United States, we don't have very good health care. We don't have universal health care. And a lot of times, women experience much more health issues compared to men, and that does take a toll financially. I think something that's quite specific about the United States is that it is very clear based off of racial lines, the different, I guess, impacts of poverty and gender discrimination, the impacts that these various things have on different racial groups. Because I'm pretty sure some of you have seen the different news and stories that have come up since 2020 with like Black Lives Matter and all these like South Asian hate, like all these social movements that revolve around different racial groups that not all people are treated equal in the United States, right? Oftentimes, people who are not white are treated worse, right? And it is very not just like an interpersonal thing, but it is very systemic, right? And as such, poverty also affects different groups differently based off of the history, right, of the United States. A lot of times we can say that the United States is built on upon, the genocide of Native Americans and the backs of Black enslaved people, right? That's kind of the history of the United States. So as such, poverty will all like as a result of that history, poverty will impact certain groups more than others. And I just want to kind of make a note of that here. So for example, 25.4% of Native Americans, Indigenous people in the United States, live in poverty, right? And then next is the Black community with 20.8%, then Hispanic 17.6, then white at 10.1, and Asian at 10. So of course, another aspect is gender, right? Like we know that unfortunately, um, men and women are not treated equal, and they're not treated equal at all in the United States, right? Despite, what the US says about, oh, like gender and like, oh, women empowerment, blah, 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 blah. However, we know that with the rise of certain policies, women are affected at disproportionate rates compared to men, right? Kind of like the ban on abortion, all these other issues that specifically target people with uteruses. And a lot of those times, people who have uteruses are women, right? In 2018, pulling from kind of the same study, 10.6% of men and 12.9% of women live in poverty. And then what's another interesting thing is that poverty rate for married couples was 4.7. However, poverty rates um, of single parent families with no wife was 12.7, and poverty rates for single parent families with no husband was 24.9. So the fact that if one single parent family with the wife, only the mom present, it that poverty rate is double that if it is a single dad, single parent, aka only the father present. What that shows is that there is a pay gap, right, between men and women in the United States, that perhaps in this single parent situation, the dad is making a lot more money, right, compared to what a single mom would make. So yeah, so even kind of in that single parent family situation, we kind of see that there is a very stark economic difference between like families with only one mom and families with only one dad. So yeah, and then another aspect of it is disability, right? We also know that in the United States, oftentimes those with people with disabilities are not given the same opportunities as those who are able-bodied, right? And unfortunately, like there's a lack of recognition that we're all only temporarily able-bodied, right? It only takes one accent, one illness, one something that makes all of us disabled. That is just simply the reality of being human. However, we live in a society that don't really care and that don't create infrastructure that will allow everybody to live a full life, right? No matter if they have certain disabilities or need certain accommodations, right? Like we are not at least in the United States, it's our societies are not built in a way that is extremely accommodating. Would be amiss, right, to not touch upon the LGBTQ community when talking about gender and poverty and all of that, right? In the US, we found that approximately 22% of LGBTQ folks live in poverty compared to 16% of straight and cisgender adults. So what does that mean, right? How come, queer people have kind of a larger rate of poverty compared to their straight counterparts? And some of that could be chalked up to the fact that, discrimination obviously still exists in the United States against LGBTQ folks. So that could, impact their employment opportunities and financial stability. Sometimes, right, unfortunately, even though there's laws supposedly protecting queer folks in the workplace, sometimes, employers can get around that, or, ones they might create some other excuses to not hire, not, promote queer folks, things like that. 70% of the nation's poorest populations are women and children, right? A lot of times women are also the main caretakers of children. Um, so, and with that, that's there comes childcare expenses. There comes expenses in, getting your kid through K to 12, buying supplies, all of that stuff. A lot of times, women are burdened with that caretaking task. And especially if, they are not getting financial support from a partner or anything like that, a lot of times women have to take on all that expenses themselves. A lot of times women are paid less, right? They're paid less in different industries. So just from the get-go, they have less spending power, right? They have less money in the bank. But the cost of things are going to be the same, if not more expensive for women, right? We all know about things called the pink tax, right? When sometimes female products, feminine products are more expensive and priced higher compared to the male counterpart, right? So these are different ways that, even though women are making less comparatively to a lot of men, they are paying more because that's how society and companies exploit kind of the needs of women. And a lot of times, they are forced to take on jobs that are already low paying, things that revolve around domestic care, things around, maybe like teaching jobs or like things like that, where it's not as highly valued and there's more women in those fields compared to men, right? And as such, it's undervalued, right? Even though all work, is work and all work is hard, right? No matter what job you're doing. And all work takes skills, right? So unfortunately, there is that gender gap. So gender wage gap. And then another aspect is that the social safety net in the United States does not fully, support women families. And we'll kind of talk a little bit more about kind of the social safety net in the next few slides. And another thing that, women face at a very high rate compared to male counterparts is domestic and sexual violence, right? So these things can result in more economic insecurity among women compared to their male counterparts, right? For example, if they face certain, harassments at jobs and, the choices between like leaving the job or, like continuing to face that harassment, right? Like it's putting a lot of women in these situations that um also put their like livelihoods and economic security at risk, right? So, forcing victims to leave jobs for safety, for safety, but then what happens, right? You're unemployed and then you have to, find a job, but it's not guaranteed that you're gonna find one immediately, etc. Or worse, right? You have to then maybe something happens and you have to seek medical and like legal support. And those are all money out of pockets. And it's like it's adding on to potentially making people like fall into poverty. And this chart here, it shows medium earnings by sex and educational attainment. So across the bat, you can just see that the blue is men, and then the orange is women, and that across the bat, no matter the education attainment, men are always making a lot bit more than women. So you can look at the chart. And this is from 2022, so pretty recent. And here it just kind of describes the poverty, oopsies, describes the poverty trap. So, low income, and then you're forced to just be in circles of, maybe you don't have opportunities for education and healthcare, and then you don't gain the skills, and then you're deemed as, not as productive, and then you're just forced to be low income. So it's kind of this unescapable trap, right? And that's oftentimes like, and I think a lot of times there's this narrative that, oh, you're poor because you don't work hard, right? Oh, you're poor because you're dumb or whatever. And I think a lot of times what the data is showing is that it's not about your own personal reasons of being poor, but rather how society has forced you to be poor and kept you poor, right? Like, in the next part, I'm gonna show you a video, of this woman who works in advocating to end poverty in the United States, and she talks a little bit about how she, as a working woman, still face like economic insecurity, right? Even though she has a job, right? She's obviously very well educated, she's very qualified, and yet she still faces poverty. So I'm gonna take kind of a moment to kind of introduce that, and then we'll hop on into that video, and then we'll come back. So.
Shame on you, and shame on me, and shame on each and every one of us who haven't rattled the windows of these buildings with cries of outrage at a government that thinks their office furniture is worthy of $40,000 a year and families and children aren't. Today I'm here to help you better understand poverty, because poverty is my lived experience. And I'm also here to acknowledge the biased beliefs that poor people are lazy and that poverty is their fault. But how do I make you understand things like working full-time for $10 an hour is only about $19,000 a year, even though it's well above the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour? I want to tell you about a single mom I met who was working at a gas station. She was promoted to manager, and within 30 days, she had to report her new income to DHHR. Within 60 days, her rent bumped from $475 to $950 a month. She lost her SNAP benefits and her family's health insurance. So she did what poor people are forced to do all the time. She resigned her promotion and went back to working part-time just so she and her family could survive. I can tell you about being above the poverty guideline, nursing my gallbladder with essential oils and prayer, chewing on cloves and eating ibuprofen like they're Tic Tacs because I don't have health insurance and I can't afford a dentist. I have 2 jobs and a bachelor's degree, and I struggle to make ends meet. The federal poverty guidelines say that I'm not poor, but I cashed in a jar full of change the other night so my daughter could attend a high school band competition with her bands. I can't go grocery shopping without a calculator. I had to decide which bills not to pay to be here in this room today. Believe me, I pulled myself up by the bootstraps so many damn times that I've ripped them off. The current poverty guidelines are ridiculously out of touch. The poverty line for a family of 3 is $21,720. Where I live, because of the oil and gas boom, a 3-bedroom home rents for $1,200 a month. So if I made $22,000 a year, which could disqualify me from assistance, I would have $8,000 left to raise 2 children and myself on. And yet the poverty guidelines wouldn't classify me as poor. I Googled congressman's salary the other day, and according to Senate.gov, the salary for senators, representatives, and delegates is $174,000 a year. So a year of work for you is the equivalent of almost 4 years of work for me. And I'm $24,000 above the federal poverty guidelines definition of poor. It would take 9 people working full-time for a year at $10 an hour to match y'all's salary.
So these are kind of just some policy suggestions, changes that can alleviate some of these costs that are bore by, women and parents. Another thing is child's tax credit. This would be like almost like a national child allowance. It will give money to ensure that, child poverty rates are reduced. And as such, then it would make sure that, women and families are less burdened with cost of having children. Employment policies, so supporting things like unemployment insurance, minimum wage increases, job programs, etc. Food assistance, so making sure that those who are living below the poverty line, that they have access to good nutritious foods. So fully funding these programs, and then housing assistance. In the U.S., housing is extremely expensive, and it's only gotten more expensive after COVID. So making sure that these programs that support housing, like, having voucher programs that can, provide some government support for, to make rent, things like that, and energy assistance programs, like making sure people are housed is one of the number one ways to ensure that we do not have an increase of homelessness, and make sure that people can hopefully then start to get out of poverty. So yeah, so through this presentation, I hope that y'all got kind of get some sort of sense of kind of the situation of poverty and the effects of women, and as well as other marginalized groups in the U.S. And as well as some potential solutions that we can all take, and we can advocate upon to ensure that these issues can be resolved sooner rather than later, right? Because we, at least in the case of the United States, we do have enough money to actually end poverty and end food insecurity. It's just that the willingness to invest into these issues, right, and not into issues such as war, that is the choice that I guess as citizens of not just our respective countries, but citizens of the world, we do have to make.